One of the world's biggest political and social challenges in the new millennium is the growing religiously inspired violent radicalization. With increased connectivity, the re-emergence of nationalism, and ever-increasing diversity, how can we understand what radicalization is driven by? How can we build programs to prevent and counter religiously attributed violent radicalization? In Europe, over the last 2 decades, many religiously inspired violent attacks have taken place. However, Italy has, so far, not seen the same degree of violent radicalization. An issue that has increasingly raised the attention in the country is the phenomenon of radicalization among inmates. Detainees sentenced for religiously inspired violent radicalization have started to be placed in special high security sections. The Italian government has also initiated de-radicalization and counter-radicalization programs carried out by authorized imams.
Questo paese è il nostro paese e deve essere il nostro punto di riferimento. Allora, le caratteristiche, torniamo a dirle di nuovo, per un imam che entra nel carcere: ottima conoscenza della religione, ottima conoscenza della lingua italiana. La preghiera del venerdì si fa metà in arabo, metà in italiano. Qualsiasi parola che viene detta in arabo viene tradotta in italiano. Deve conoscere molto bene la lingua italiana per tradurre in modo corretto i concetti della religione e tra l'altro deve essere un punto di riferimento affidato per la società.
Walid is one of the imams authorized by the Ministry of the Interior to provide inmates with spiritual assistance. On Fridays, during his lunch break from work, he volunteers at Turin prison to lead the prayer.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Io penso che il carcere di Torino sta cercando di dare a loro la possibilità di confessare in modo giusto la loro religione. Ma loro notano che dopo la preghiera del venerdì, la settimana in cui non si fa la preghiera del venerdì, il clima è diverso, è più teso nel carcere. I bisogni dei detenuti ci sono diversi, veramente si può parlare di tanto. Allora ti chiedono il tappetino per la preghiera, ti chiedono qualche volta di portargli una scatola di tè, ti chiedono di portargli un rosario, ti chiedono un Corano, un libro. Loro iniziano a vedere in te una persona rispettabile che viene sempre a dire certe parole e cercano sempre di venire a salutarti, a ringraziarti per quello che fai. Ci vuole una persona più stabile lì, che vada a parlare con le persone e riesca a capire cosa pensano, sì, cosa pensano della società, cosa pensano della nazione, perché noi come comunità musulmana pensiamo che l'Italia è il nostro paese. Durante i nostri discorsi cerchiamo di spiegare a loro questo concetto, che tu vivi qua perché questo è il tuo paese. Fine. Non sei più immigrato, questo è il tuo posto. perché nessuno di loro pensa di tornare indietro. Il lavoro volontario ha un senso. Dio ci ha chiesto di vivere in questa società. Se io non uso un po' del mio tempo per dare un minimo aiuto agli altri, le mie preghiere sono servite a poco. Il lavoro volontariato nel carcere non basta. Bisogna avere un lavoro fisso, una persona che sta lì, a contatto con le persone, e questa persona possa dare anche degli elementi per dire: guardate che qua bisogna stare un po' più attenti, bisogna lavorare in più, bisogna cercare più contatto con questa persona, bisogna spiegare di più a questa persona. Non c'è paragone tra il costo e i benefici. Per quanto riguarda l'Italia, per quanto riguarda la polizia, avere meno persone in carcere, c'è un ritorno enorme e sicuramente il costo lo giustifica tantissimo. La popolazione carceraria è molta. Io penso che questo tipo di lavoro veramente aiuta tantissimo a prevenire qualsiasi tipo di radicalizzazione.
This program shows how certain initiatives that require a small budget from the state could have a very important outcome for the whole of society. However, Ukoi has learned from experience that once the sentence is served, what people need most in order not to go back to prison is a job.
Il lavoro è il punto più importante che le politiche, le amministrazioni possono offrire alle persone per allontanarli dagli ambienti indesiderati in generale. Sono convinto che una persona che ha gli strumenti per vivere in modo dignitoso sicuramente non torna alla radicalizzazione.
In the United Kingdom, Islamist terrorism has formed the main source of contemporary, religiously inspired radicalization. The first major Islamist terrorist attack was the bombings on the 7th of July, 2005. The UK has also been one of the main source countries for foreign fighters. Around 850 British nationals have traveled to Syria and Iraq to take part in the conflict. In 2017, the country reported the highest number of failed and successful terror-related attacks of Western European countries.
JAWAAB is trying to build the power of young Muslims, and we do this through setting up community events, doing leadership programs, building the leadership and creative skills of young Muslims, and also tackling some really serious social issues such as Islamophobia, racism, and kind of structural inequality.
Islamophobia affects all young Muslims. We see in the media constantly narratives pushed on us that all Muslims are terrorists, or all Muslim women are submissive, all Muslim women are oppressed.
Rizwan and Nadia are members of JAWAAB, a volunteer organization that works with young Muslims. It was founded as a response to the negative spotlight on Muslims that followed the 7/7 bombings.
We conducted research into young people's experiences of belonging and Islamophobia, and every young Muslim woman I interviewed who wore the hijab, for example, all of them had experienced hate crime in the street, people spitting at them, people trying to tug their hijabs off their heads. Whereas a lot of the young Muslim guys I know, they've been stopped and searched more by police, for example. So they're seen as like more, I guess, susceptible to radicalisation.
There could be many reasons why young Muslims are connected to like ideas of radicalization. I think it comes from the general demonization of Muslims in the media, how like Muslims are portrayed in other countries and how that then feeds back to the treatment of Muslims in the UK.
Many people could look at, for example, the discrimination they face at school, the discrimination you face by the media, the socio-economic exclusion you face.
So like the reasons why maybe people feel more disaffected from kind of mainstream society is so much more complex. So I think the current initiatives by the government to tackle radicalization are not effective at all. A lot of the counter-terrorism policies are really stripping away any kind of safe space.
I don't really like the concept of empowerment because it implies that I can just give someone power and then they'll suddenly be able to change the world. I don't think that process really happens. Building people's power is like a constant process.
Putting them in positions of leadership and you know, them learning from, you know, running an event or, you know, speaking to the media or public speaking, like we create opportunities where young people can really grow. Kind of making them understand where power actually is and where their power lies and where their agency lies is very important for us.
You don't want to be squeezed into this space where you're a young Muslim woman, and because the media has this really kind of stereotypical view of you as like submissive and oppressed, you have to like do everything to challenge it and be like, I don't know, a boxer or like demonstrably masculine and empowering.
We should be in the Muslim community celebrating diversity, and that diversity isn't only confined to like religious doctrine. The Muslim community needs to hear young Muslims and what young Muslims are talking about as well, and how like some of these issues around kind of Islamophobia and racism is impacting their lives.
I've definitely seen the young people who I've worked with become kind of activists. I think that's pretty incredible to see a group of young people go from like politically charged but not really knowing what to do about it to kind of creating change within their own communities.
In Bulgaria, radicalization and violent extremism as potential threats to society have only recently been raised in policy debates, mainly as a response to so-called homegrown Islamist radicalization. However, there are other forms of violent radicalization, such as right-wing extremism, that exist in the country but have received considerably less attention. The Center for the Study of Democracy in Sofia started to study these phenomena and develop prevention strategies.
Basically, prevention means that all kinds of institutions and society as a whole become aware of the problem. We did a very broad mapping study to understand what are the risks that our country faces in terms of different types of radicalization and extremism. The most prevalent is hate crime, and mainly hate crime against migrants, against minorities.
Youth Right On is a prevention initiative that aims to address the problem of far-right influence over youth in Bulgaria through the development of an alternative narrative to confront extremist messages and ideas propagated online. It is targeted specifically at young people aged 14 to 19 years old.
Extremist groups, they offer such a belonging based on these pillars like this is us and this is them. So this is one of the factors, basically identity seeking, frustrations in terms of unclear future, all these kinds of fears can play into those narratives.
The The first stage of the project was a national representative survey to understand why young people find certain ideas more attractive than others.
The internet is a social environment. When we are talking about radicalization, we are talking about groups of people who are radicalized and can communicate with the children and to persuade them. So the most appropriate way to prevent children is to develop their skills, digital and media literacy, also social skills, social information assessment skills.
The second step was an accurate study of what a Facebook user might be exposed to if he or she started to like certain sites that are related to far-right content.
Three topics kind of stand out as the most controversial. Migrants, as you know, Bulgaria is an entry point. That has caused some debate and some reaction. And it says on top, Bulgarians, and on the bottom, while you feed the illegal migrants, your parents are starving. The other that is kind of ongoing and persistent in Bulgaria because of deeper, more historical context is the problem of Roma integration and criminality. That causes a lot of hateful commentary. This, for example, was posted by a famous Bulgarian, one who used to arrange, more likely, these civil brigades to hunt refugees and migrants who were illegally crossing the countries. The third one revolves around LGBT rights, the so-called gender ideology. That causes a lot of heated discussions and some far-right and extremist commentary.
Religion does play a role in the narratives of the far right in Bulgaria. Maybe it's not a central role, but it is very often used in justifying certain explanations provided by far right actors. It's used as a way to separate, and especially the migrant crisis has fueled into that, and the rise of the Islamic State as well, because this gives fuel to far-right organizations to say, look, Islam is bad and we are the good ones. Coming back to our target group for our campaign, these are young people and they know very little about religion. It will be very interesting to see how these narratives that do use religion, how they influence young people that have very little knowledge. These kinds of extremist narratives, they do not aim to have a discussion that's based on facts. It's a discussion that's emotional, that speaks to different frustrations, deficits, gaps, and this excludes having a neutral and factual discussion about religion, what it is, what it means to these people. Teaching young people digital literacy, teaching them critical thinking. These are the factors of resilience that will prevent any type of extremist influence to take root.
In the recent past, India has suffered heavily from Islamist terrorism. In 2008, there were a series of coordinated attacks in Mumbai, including an assault on the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel, which lasted 3 days. This terror attack, like many others before it, was driven by cross-border terrorists and global jihadist groups that exist outside the country. It is only recently that the Indian government has acknowledged this threat and turned its attention to the issue of religious radicalization. India has many counter-terrorism strategies, but with 1.3 billion people and a large territory, the task is very difficult. How is it possible to prevent the spread of religious radicalization? FURFURA Sharif is an important Sufi shrine in West Bengal in the Hooghly district. It has been a holy place for Muslims who have been present in the area since the 14th century. FURFURA Sharif contains the mazar of Abu Bakr Siddiq and his 5 sons. He was a social and a religious reformer who founded charitable institutes, orphanages, and madrasas. His great-grandson, Maulana Kutubuddin Siddiq, continued the family tradition of social activism and founded the Mujahideen mission. The 50-year-old organization plays a fundamental role for the Islamic community of the area. In order to prevent any kind of radicalization, they regularly organize interfaith meetings and dialogues in different parts of Bengal. They have a hostel for children in need. They provide them with food and an education, and they run anti-radicalization programs among young people. The Islamic community of FURFURA Sharif continues the tradition of this strong education system with 2 important learning centers. In 1903, Abu Bakr Siddiq founded the FURFURA Fathiya Senior Madrasa, a high school for boys and girls now controlled by the state, with teachers from different religions and with the last member of the Siddiq family being part of the board of directors. There is also a university where selected students are prepared to become Maulana. In this institute, young boys are taught moderate Islam. Once the training is completed, they will be sent all over India and to other countries in order to spread a peaceful version of Islam. This represents a decisive action to prevent and counter radicalization. Just a few hundred meters away from the mazar of the Siddiq family, there is another important organization for the Islamic community. FURFURA Sharif Ahl Sunnat al-Jamaat was founded quite recently, but is very active and already popular among the young people of rural southern Bengal.
ইসলাম শেখাচ্ছে কেউ যদি একটা নিরীহ মানুষকে মারে সে যেন পুরো মনুষ্য জাতিকে হত্যা করলো, এটা কোরআনের আইন। এবং কেউ যদি একটা নিরীহ মানুষকে বাঁচায় সে যেন পুরো মনুষ্য জাতিকে বাঁচালো।
Apart from religious activities, they regularly organize a number of charitable programs and are staunch critics of Wahhabism. They define themselves as social workers, and they are willing to give voice to the local Islamic community.
না, আমার সংগঠনের কোনো পলিটিক্যাল কাজ নয়, তবে হ্যাঁ, যদি কোনো পলিটিক্যাল মানুষকে ক্ষতির দিকে নিয়ে যায়, আমরা সেটাকে বিরোধী করি, আন্দোলন করি, কেন এটা আমার দেশের গণতান্ত্রিক অধিকার এবং আমার ইসলামও এটা শিখিয়েছে যে অসহায় মানুষের সাথ দাও। কিন্তু কিছু মানুষ এরা এদের নিজেদের স্বার্থ লোভের জন্য কিছু মানুষকে আর্থিক সহযোগিতা দিয়ে তাদের ব্রেন ওয়াশ করে তাদেরকে খারাপ লাইনে নিয়ে যাওয়া হয়। দেখুন, মানুষ সন্ত্রাস হয় বা খারাপ রাস্তায় যায় দুটো বিষয়ের জন্য। সর্বপ্রথম বিষয় হলো এডুকেশন না থাকার জন্য, দ্বিতীয় নম্বর হলো অভাবের জন্য।
Their commitment can be considered a modern way of countering radicalization by creating safe spaces to express and address the needs of the community.
একটা হলো মানুষের জীবিকা, তাদের থাকার, খাওয়ার, বাসস্থান, পরনের কাপড়ের সুব্যবস্থা করা, আর একটা হলো এডুকেশনের জন্য আরও বেশি বেশি করে মানুষকে শিক্ষা দেওয়া। এই দুটো জিনিস যদি মানুষ পৃথিবীর বুকে পায়, তাহলে এই রকম সন্ত্রাসী এইসব জিনিসগুলো অনেকটাই আমার মনে হয় নেই, থাকবে না বলতে গেলেই চলে।
Since the 70s, Morocco has seen a rise in conservatism and a process of radicalization, especially involving young people. These phenomena are due to a combination of international events and domestic developments. The wars in Afghanistan, Bosnia, Iraq, and Syria were seen as a confrontation between Islam and the West. Internally, Morocco suffered from widespread poverty, youth unemployment, and high levels of illiteracy. Many Moroccans have been involved in terrorist actions in Europe, and hundreds have joined the wars in the Middle East.
بالنسبة لداخل السجون كنشتغلوا مع جميع النزلاء بغض النظر على شنو هي الجريمة اللي داروا، ولكن حنا كنستهدفوا جميع المتطرفين والإرهابيين. ملي دخلنا معهم أول مرة لمسنا عندهم العنف كبير وكبير بزاف، ولكن ملي ولينا نمشيو عدة مرات اكتشفنا بأن العنف تينقص وأنهم كيتراجعوا.
The Centre des Droits des Gens is an independent non-governmental organization that performs national non-profit activities all over Morocco. They work on the implementation of human rights in the country and the re-education of inmates inside the prisons.
والآن انتقلنا المرحلة ديال تكوين النزلاء وكنأسسوا الأندية لحقوق الإنسان والمواطنة داخل السجون، وهما كيشتغلوا مع باقي النزلاء في اطار المضاعفه ديال التكوين والتكوين بالنظير، وهما كيعاونونا في انشطه كبيره كتهم جميع نزلاء السجون باش يتكونوا. هذوك الناس في وضعيه صعبه وفي وضعيه مستريسين، يعني في وضعيه قلق مستمر، اذا الموسيقى كتخفف كتهذبهم. مهم استطعنا اننا نديروا فراق المسرح داخل السجون، ومسرحيات اللي كتكلم على الارهاب وكتكلم على التطرف وكتكلم على نبذ العنف وكتكلم على التسامح. الرسم في نفس الوقت هو تيعطينا اداه باش نعرفوا المعاناه ديالهم. عده مرات اكتشفنا التعذيب في واحد السجن غير من خلال الرسومات ديال النزلاء. يعني ما عندناش علاقه بالدين، حيت حنا كنامنوا بحقوق الانسان كلها بجميع الديانات، كنامنوا بجميع العقائد، لكن هذوك المتطرفين الاسلاميين كنستهدفوهم وكنتكلموا لهم على نبذ العنف، على حل نزاعات الطرق السلميه، وكاينه برامج اللي دايرها الدوله. اذا بالنسبه للقضيه ديال التشغيل ودعم النزلاء كنديروا لهم تكوين داخل السجن على تعاونيات الجمعيات المديره للربح، على المقاولات، وهذا الشيء وكنصاحبوهم من بعد ما كيخرجوا من السجن باش كنقلبوا معهم على الادماج ديالهم داخل سوق الشغل داخل المجتمع. اولا حنا كنحاولوا باش نقصوا من عدد العود للسجون، ثانيا كنحاولوا نحولوا المؤسسه السجنيه من مؤسسه اللي هي في التقاليد المغربيه وفي الافكار الناس انها عقابيه وخصها تضرب الناس يتعذبوا ويتزجروا، الى مؤسسه تربويه يمكن الناس اللي يدخلوا لها يستافدوا ويخرجوا احسن للمجتمع. بالنسبه لما هو السبب الاساسي في دفع التطرف في المغرب، اولا عدم الوعي والمعرفه، لان اصلا الجهل والفقر هادو جوج ديال العوامل اللي كيدعموا الارهاب. بالنسبه لماذا يجب على الدوله ان تتخذ من اجراءات لتطوير الاوضاع ولتوقيف الانتهاكات، اعمال الحقوق الاقتصاديه والاجتماعيه لعموم الناس واللي هي جد متخلفه في المغرب. وحنا كمركز حقوق الناس من الاول الرؤيه ديالنا هي تغيير المغرب الى دوله الحق والقانون، وليست هناك دولة الحق والقانون في البلاصة اللي كيتنفذ فيها القانون اللي هو السجن ليست فيه حقوق الإنسان. هذا إشكال كبير.
In Australia, there are high levels of ethnic, religious, and linguistic diversity due to decades of policies promoting multiculturalism and immigration. a number of contemporary challenges arise for Australia as a result of religious diversity. The traditional and alt-right have mobilized around anti-Islam narratives. Australian Muslims experience discrimination and marginalization in relation to national and social belonging. Violent religious radicalization in Australia has overwhelmingly been associated with Islamic radical violence, but there are also a number of active right-wing extremist groups embedded within white supremacist movements.
Good morning all, and thank you for attending the Australian Multicultural Foundation's Community Awareness Training program, Building Resilience in Your Community. The program that we have developed is not specific to any one national, political, religious or ideological group.
The Australian Multicultural Foundation is an NGO and has created a program that helps communities to understand the range of antisocial behaviors that may lead people down negative pathways.
When you're dealing with antisocial behaviours, there are a whole range of preconditions around this. It was really important for us to develop a program that was adaptable, but it looked at a whole range of preconditions, whether it be social, cultural, religious or economic, that plays an important role in one's life and one's journey.
The program is based on the idea that the whole community plays a fundamental role in social cohesion.
I think a lot of our programs have been looking at the top layers and not drilling down into where it actually plays out in the community. It is on that community level is where the issues are. It is the mother and the father, it is the school teacher, it is the local counsellor, it is the local police officer. They are the ones that are dealing with those issues, and they can play a very important preventative role in that area.
Experience in the field has brought to light new and interesting discoveries that led them to change some of their prevention strategies.
We found that when it came to radicalisation or violent extremism or forms of criminality, or indeed any form of antisocial behaviour, it was really an individual phenomenon rather than a group phenomenon. So we felt it was very important to develop a program, a strategy or a program, so that those closest to the individual were able to recognise these early warning signs.
That's what the model looks like. As we can see, the colours indicate the varying levels of intensity. The three categories that the model looks at, the first one being social relations, where an individual is making new friendship circles who could possibly have bad influences on them, or it can also mean withdrawing from society as well, cutting off social relations. Ideology, now it's not necessarily adopting new beliefs per se as well. It could be adopting more sort of rigid or extreme interpretation of the existing beliefs. And finally, criminal orientation. This involves adopting the belief that violent criminal methods become justifiable to support the new ideology.
Religion can offer narratives that provide meaning and to help organise sentiments of disaffection, anger, frustration and grievances, but it can also be used as an effective tool by VE groups who are looking for recruiting alienated youth. Young people are looking for these voices, looking for strong voices, so maybe, in the absence of voices, it becomes a problem. So this is where your role becomes really important, to direct young people into, the right areas so that they are hearing the right voices. We had a young man once and who was actually recruited and had changed, and the family had not recognised his change, where we were able to grab that person and then take that person on a new journey. But I suppose that was good in itself, you feel good, but what was better was to work with that person who then became a significant mover and shaker, because he was able to then tap into others who were just as vulnerable and shift them out of that using our program. And that made a difference.